The sun burned low over the desert training ground as the platoon lined up, boots crunching gravel, when she stepped out of the transport truck wearing a uniform that looked almost too clean for the chaos around her, and that was when the whispers started, low laughs sliding into open mockery as one soldier snorted, "Go home, princess, this isn't a photo shoot," while another muttered that command must be desperate to send a woman into a live fire zone, and she heard every word yet didn't he flinch, didn't he argue, didn't he correct them, simply adjusted the strap of her rifle and walked forward with a calm that unsettled even the loudest voices, because there was something different about the way she moved, measured, deliberate, like someone who had already survived things these men hadn't yet imagined, but arrogance blinded them as a sergeant scoffed at her rank insignia, assuming she was some misplaced liaison or officer's pet, until the briefing began and the commanding colonel paused mid-sentence, eyes locking onto her shoulder, his voice faltering as he straightened instantly and snapped to attention, because stitched into her uniform, half hidden beneath dust and shadow, was a patch no one expected to see here, a SEAL General patch, worn only by those who had commanded elite operations so classified they didn't officially exist, and the air changed in an instant as laughter died mid-breath and the same soldiers who mocked her felt their stomachs drop, realizing the princess they dismissed had led night raids across 3 continents, had coordinated hostage rescues under blackout conditions, had signed off on missions that rewrote doctrine, and when she finally spoke, her voice wasn't loud but it carried, cutting through the heat and tension as she calmly took control of the briefing, exposing flaws in the training setup within seconds, predicting ambush points with terrifying accuracy, recounting lessons learned the hard way through blood, failure, and survival until even the most hardened veterans stood silent, listening like recruits again, because authority like that doesn't need to shout, and when live fire drills began and chaos erupted exactly where she said it would, she moved through smoke and confusion with lethal precision, issuing commands that saved lives, turning near disaster into a flawless execution, and by the time the dust settled, no one was laughing anymore, no one dared look her in the eye, as the soldiers who mocked her earlier now understood the truth too late that legends don't always look like what you expect, power doesn't always announce itself, and sometimes the most dangerous person on the battlefield is the one everyone underestimated, because as she walked away, the same men who told her to go home stood straighter than ever before, knowing they had just witnessed a living reminder of why respect is earned not by appearance, but by experience written in silence, scars, and that single patch that changed everything. The training ground fell unnaturally quiet after she walked off, but the silence didn't mean peace, it meant recalibration, because every soldier there was now painfully aware that their assumptions had nearly cost them everything, and as the SEAL General returned for the second phase of the exercise, she didn't humiliate them or reference the mockery, she did something far more dangerous. She raised the standard, announcing a full-spectrum combat simulation that would run non-stop for the next 30 hours, no rest rotations, no simplified objectives, and no mercy for sloppy execution, explaining with calm precision that real enemies don't pause for ego or excuses, and that elite units aren't forged in comfort but in pressure that exposes weakness, and as the drills began, exhaustion set in fast as squads failed repeatedly under scenarios designed to break command structure, communications collapsing, supply lines cut, leaders forced to adapt or watch their teams die on the board. And every time frustration rose, she was there not yelling, but surgically dismantling their decisions, replaying their mistakes frame by frame, revealing how arrogance creates blind spots, how underestimating an unknown variable like her was exactly how units get wiped out in real combat, and when night fell, the exercise turned brutal as she personally led a live navigation and extraction drill through hostile terrain, moving faster than half her escort, proving with every step that her Authority wasn't ceremonial, it was earned mile by mile, mission by mission, until one by one the soldiers stopped questioning her presence and started depending on it, trusting her calls instinctively as ambushes unfolded exactly where she predicted, and at dawn, when the final objective collapsed into chaos due to a simulated betrayal inside the unit, she did the unthinkable. She stepped back and let them lead, watching silently as the same soldiers who once mocked her adapted using the lessons she had drilled into them, executing a flawless recovery under pressure, and when the last signal flare went up and the exercise ended, she finally addressed them not as a general, but as someone who had once stood where they stood now, reminding them that the battlefield doesn't care about pride, gender, or appearances, only competence and trust. And as she removed her gloves and looked across the exhausted formation, the realization hit them harder than any punishment ever could. They hadn't just been trained by a SEAL general, they had been dismantled and rebuilt by someone who understood that the most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate. And as she pinned commendations onto those who rose to the challenge, the same soldiers who once laughed now felt something far heavier settle in, the weight of respect earned the hard way, and the knowledge that from that day forward, none of them would ever judge a uniform before understanding the story behind it. What none of them knew was that the training exercise had never been the real test, because as the exhausted unit stood down, red warning lights ignited across the command center and a priority transmission cut through the static and unscheduled escalation, a real-world crisis unfolding just beyond the borders of the exercise zone, and without ceremony the SEAL general took control, her voice steady as she issued live operational orders, transforming a mocked arrival into a moment of reckoning. As the same soldiers who once laughed were suddenly thrust into an actual deployment under her command, and the shift was immediate, fear sharpening focus as they realized this was no longer simulation, no reset button waiting if they failed, and as helicopters lifted into the night, she briefed them on an extraction mission gone wrong, an Allied reconnaissance team compromised deep in hostile territory, communications fractured, enemy forces closing in, and while panic crept into the cabin, she calmly mapped the battlefield from memory alone, anticipating enemy movement, weather shifts, and terrain choke points with such accuracy it felt less like planning and more like prediction, and when the team touched down under fire, chaos erupted exactly as she warned it would, but this time the soldiers didn't hesitate, executing her orders instinctively, moving as a single organism through darkness and gunfire, trusting her judgment with their lives, and midway through the operation when an unexpected ambush pinned them down and casualties mounted, she did the unthinkable. She stepped into the kill zone herself, coordinating fire and maneuver with lethal precision while dragging a wounded soldier to cover, proving in blood and dust that her rank didn't shield her from danger, it bound her to it. And as dawn crept over the ridgeline, they reached the trapped recon team, only to discover the situation was worse than intelligence predicted. Enemy numbers doubled, exfil routes compromised, and the clock ticking toward total encirclement. But where others might have frozen, she adapted instantly, sacrificing equipment, rerouting the plan, turning the enemy's aggression into an opening. And when the last helicopter finally clawed its way into the sky under heavy fire, the soldiers looked at her differently than ever before, not with awe, not with fear, but with absolute trust, because she had walked into death with them and brought everyone she could back alive. And as they returned to base, bloodied and silent, she gathered them once more, not to celebrate, but to remind them that war doesn't announce heroes, it reveals them under pressure, and the patch on her shoulder was never a symbol of privilege, it was a ledger of decisions made when no one was watching, of lives weighed against seconds. And as the soldiers stood there, no longer seeing a princess but a commander carved by responsibility, they understood the final lesson she left them with, that respect given too late still costs lives, and the battlefield never forgives those who judge before they understand. The mission's success should have ended the story, but instead it opened a door no one was prepared for, because within hours of their return the base was locked down and intelligence officers flooded the compound, faces tight with concern as reports surfaced that the enemy had known their extraction route before the first helicopter even lifted off, and while whispers of betrayal spread through the exhausted unit, the SEAL general didn't defend herself or point fingers. She ordered a full internal review and placed herself under the same scrutiny as everyone else, a move that stunned the soldiers who had just watched her bleed beside them, and as interrogations began and footage was dissected frame by frame, pressure mounted when a classified alert revealed that someone within the command chain had leaked operational timing, narrowing the suspect list to only a handful including her, because the authority she wielded also